Hello and welcome back to Bookish and welcome back to Faulkner August 2021, my discussion of Sanctuary, our Faulkner August choice for 2021. I filmed this yesterday and I had some technical difficulties and I just decided it'd be easier to film it again this morning, so hopefully I'm a little more succinct today than I was yesterday, and I remember to talk about everything I want to talk about. So what I've been doing is essentially just breaking down what happens in each chapter of the book. And I'm going to do that again today, and then I'm going to talk about, what themes I see in the novel, how it relates to other Faulkner novels perhaps, and then a judgment about whether or not this is a good book or not. So let's just do the chapter breakdown first. So the first chapter in this last section is chapter 24, and I'll tell you up front, if you haven't gotten to this point, or if you're going to read Sanctuary, the pace of action picks up dramatically. This is the section where you can see why movie makers might want to put this in a movie. You can see why maybe Faulkner thought, this is a potboiler, a kind of a thriller novel that's going to, sell well, because the pace of action here is incredibly fast. Having said that, it's fast without Faulkner oftentimes describing exactly what happens in kind of key moments. But chapter 24 is a really revelatory chapter. We see Temple back in her bedroom at Miss Reba's, and she's angry. We don't know exactly how long she's been there at this point, but she's been there for several weeks at this point. Faulkner in time, what are you going to do? You just kind of got to figure it out as you go along. And she's angry. She takes all the clothes and perfume and makeup that Popeye has bought her, and she throws them to the corner, because she's disgusted essentially with what Popeye has made her do, which we'll find out about here in a minute. But in the end, she ends up kind of dressing herself up again, as though she's getting ready to go out. And she does indeed go out. She goes out and she pays Minnie, who is essentially watching her, making sure she doesn't leave. She pays Minnie at Miss Reba's $20 so she can go to the drugstore. And she goes to the drugstore and she makes a phone call, and then she comes right back. This seems like it's one of those moments at which, Temple could have escaped. It seems like one of those moments at which you could say, well, whatever's gone wrong with Temple, whether she, is not in her right mind or whatever, that she's decided not to escape. But the reality that we'll find out later is that Popeye was watching her the whole time, and he knew who she was calling, and he was perfectly happy for her to make that call. She also finds a gun, one of Popeye's guns that he's left in the room, and she hides it under the pillow, and then in the end she hides it under the mattress. She then again leaves, and as she leaves this time, Popeye is outside in the car. They get in the car, they go to a, I guess a bar, a nightclub, a gambling den, a pool hall, and they dance, and Temple is very nervous. There's some scary guys around, and then Red comes in. Red is a brand new character in chapter 24, and he doesn't last much longer than chapter 24 other than in memory, because in the end, Popeye is going to kill Red. And what we find out from Temple in this chapter is essentially that Red has been having sex with Temple and Popeye has been watching. That this is what's been going on. It's happened at least twice. And that Temple appears to have developed feelings for Red. I'm not exactly sure I trust that idea, but that appears to be the case. And she is, essentially taunting Popeye with the idea that Red is a real man and he isn't, because Red is having sex with her and he's not, which, can be really confusing. There are some confusing lines here where Temple appears to plead with Popeye, and she calls him Daddy over and over again. And I have a feeling that this has something to do with a theme that Faulkner had woven into the story in the initial story, but which was taken out when the novel was revised, and the focus of the novel kind of changed to be more about Temple and less about Horace Bembo. I have a feeling that has something to do with it. A lot of, when you hear that Temple's gotten the gun, I think as readers today, we assume that Temple is planning on killing Popeye herself. But I really think that what Temple was planning on was hiding the gun in the bed so that the next time Red came over, Red could kill Popeye. It's just completely out of character with everything we know about Temple to think that she was going to kill Popeye herself, but she was more making a gun available, I think, to Red to kill Popeye the next time Popeye brought Red to Miss Rivas to have sex with her. That's why the gun was there. That's my interpretation. And that the phone call she made to Red, that's who she called when she went to the drugstore, was really about setting Popeye up so that Red could in fact kill him. That's my interpretation of those events, and that's where that goes. I also wanted to point something out that had been bothering me for a while since Temple got to Miss Rivas, and that is that not just that Temple begins drinking alcohol, because she does, but she specifically drinks gin. You know, being kind of an old historian, my memory told me there was something about gin that made it kind of an important part of what was going on with Temple. And if you look back, I believe in 19th century, gin became a really popular drink among kind of poor and working class people in England, and it was blamed for all kinds of social problems. You know, that people believed that gin specifically was causing social problems, and one of those was that women who drank gin became sexually promiscuous and ended up falling into prostitution. That's why I think we see the drink that Temple drinks at Miss Riva's place is gin, and that Miss Riva and the other madams who run houses of prostitution drink gin as well. Chapter 25, Red's already dead, and we essentially get the proprietors of these houses of prostitution all meet at Miss Riva's place, and they are mourning the death of Red and how good looking he was and how everybody liked him, and they're kind of talking about that, and they're drinking beer, and then they're drinking gin. And they also, then we learned that Miss Riva had found out what Popeye was doing, and this caused her to lose respect for Popeye and essentially to kick Popeye out, to kind of end what was going on in that way even before Red died. Chapter 26 is a really short chapter, and essentially this is a chapter in which we see Narcissa, Horace Benbow's sister, meeting with and talking to the district attorney who's going to be prosecuting the case against Lee Goodwin, in which Horace is going to be representing Lee Goodwin, and she goes to find out essentially if Horace has a chance of winning. I have to be honest, she doesn't have a lot of faith in her brother's, I think, ability as a lawyer, and probably with good reason, as we'll find out. And she wants to find out essentially how much damage this is going to do to him and his reputation, because I think we can tell from what Senator Snopes says that Horace wants to be a judge, which would help Narcissa a lot. And she wants to find out if he has a chance to win, and she finds out he doesn't, that essentially the fix is in. And Horace isn't going to win, and that's really what chapter 26 is. Chapter 27 is covers essentially the first day of the trial of Lee Goodwin. Takes place in chapter 27, and not a lot happens other than in that chapter we see Ruby take the stand and be questioned about exactly when she married Lee Goodwin, as a way of pointing out that she shouldn't be trusted by the jury because she is a fallen woman who has been having sex with and is living with a man to whom she's not married. It's also during that trial that Benbow makes it clear during the course of that trial that they'll be accusing somebody else, Popeye, of actually killing Tommy, which Lee is on trial for. And this upsets Lee. Lee says, well, you've just signed my death warrant. He is convinced that Popeye is going to show up and kill him. And then we have a long scene which takes place in the jail cell where we have Horace and Ruby and the baby and Lee are all there. And Lee is intentionally sitting essentially in front of the window so that, if Popeye showed up and wanted to shoot him, he'd be there, because Lee is convinced that, he's going to be killed by Popeye anyway. We have this whole kind of discussion about how Benbow is going to be paid by Lee, and it becomes clear really quickly to Benbow that Ruby intends to pay him with sex, that's how they're going to pay him. And this again is Ruby willing to prostitute herself to help Lee, and she tells more of her backstory and how that all happened long before, and how that happened with she and Lee. And we get that story again, and we see Horace refusing this. And this makes Horace appear to be, noble and a better person, and I suppose he is than lots of other people. But we would be wrong to put too much faith in Horace, I think. And then chapter 28 is the next day of the trial, and really what we get in the next day of the trial is we learn exactly kind of what happened to Temple, and we see Temple testify. Temple has been found. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Senator Snopes had been tracking down exactly where she was, and he sold that information to the district attorney so that she could be brought in, and she's going to testify not as a defense witness, as Horace had hoped, but as a prosecution witness. We have the corn cob with which she was raped. We see the district attorney essentially saying that Lee should be burned, that somebody who does something like rape a young woman like Temple Drake with a corn cob should, their trial is essentially too good for him. Horace tries to object, but everything falls apart really quickly when Temple testifies that it was Lee who raped her and it was Lee who killed Tommy. This is a lie. This is not true. Popeye killed Tommy and Popeye rapes Temple. That's what happened, but she testifies that it was Lee, which then kind of makes her appear to be a terrible person, and I'm not going to argue that she isn't. But there are a couple of things I think that you have to keep in mind that have been built into the story about Temple and about why maybe she does this that are important. Number one, everybody's afraid of Popeye. Temple's afraid of Popeye, Lee's afraid of Popeye, people are afraid of Popeye, and she has reason to believe that if she names Popeye in open court as her assaulter and the murderer, that Popeye might show up and kill her. Which, clearly she has some desire for self-preservation. But additionally, think about what would happen if she said that Popeye was the person who had assaulted her and Popeye had killed Tommy. That would lead to a manhunt for Popeye. Popeye would be brought in, and it's possible that details of the story about the life that Temple has been leading at Miss Reva's might come out during that trial. And that would ruin her reputation, even if she wasn't at fault at all. Even if, we think, oh, well, she's clearly the victim and maybe everybody else would, it would really ruin her reputation in the South. She would become like Ruby. And she wants to be able to go back to the life that she had. And so I think that also provides reason why she testifies against Lee and says it was him. You notice at the end, when she comes off the witness stand, her father is there, and she leans on her father, and he escorts her to the door where she's met by her 4 brothers, and they surround her, protecting her. She's gotten back to the place where she was. She's been traumatized, she's been damaged, she'll never be the same, but she's at least back in the world that she lost. And I think that this was an act of kind of self-preservation on her part. Again, after that, things spin out of control really quickly. Lee is going to be killed in essentially what is a lynching. He's burned to death by the townspeople, as the district attorney actually suggested. Horace shows up at the burning, and people recognize him, and they're going to throw him in the fire too. I don't know exactly how he is saved from that, but he is. We pick up Horace again next, and he is already on his way back to his family, his wife. He's on his way back there. They're going to be reconciled. He'll go back to that marriage. We see that he's a little bit desperate to make sure that Little Belle, his stepdaughter, is okay. He calls her on the phone while she's at a house party and talks to her, and she assures him she's okay. But I thought it was interesting that Faulkner has a man kind of get on the phone and talk to Horace for a second, meaning that she really probably isn't nearly as safe, and that kind of drawing that parallel between Temple and Little Belle. And then in the last chapters where we learn about Popeye, that Popeye was impotent, that Popeye had an illness which prevented him from drinking, that Popeye's illness or the situation surrounding his birth meant that he was not going to mature. He would never be a real man. In other words, he'd never be capable of having sex with a woman. And he's kind of frozen in this kind of adolescence, which I think is important for understanding Popeye's cruelty. Kids at a certain age are completely sort of self-centered, and that can lead to a good deal of cruelty, and I think that's what we're supposed to believe about Popeye. I do think that making Popeye in some way sympathetic right at the end is a nod to gangster movies. Gangster movies had a tendency to have these kind of villains who appear to be completely cold-blooded killing machines who are pure evil, and at the end we find out what was wrong with them, and if they really love their mother or something like that. I think this is clearly Faulkner being influenced by those kinds of ideas and that kind of writing or that kind of movie making, and that's kind of where our novel ends. Popeye is accused of murder in a town in Alabama. He's convicted. I thought it was interesting that the jury took exactly as long to convict Popeye, 8 minutes, as the jury in Jefferson took to convict Lee, 8 minutes. I thought that was a nice symmetry that Faulkner puts in there. And then Popeye goes essentially to the gallows with no regrets, no remorse, appearing to have no feeling, because essentially I'm worried more about what his hair looks like than what's going to happen to him, because essentially that's who Popeye is to the end. So that's a pretty pot-boilery book, particularly from chapter 24 on, and in other chapters before. There's not a lot of reflection. There's not a lot of inner thought. There's not a lot of attempt to develop characters. It's just action, action, action. And so I think it's fair to believe that Faulkner wrote this novel to be a popular novel, that attracted the attention of readers, that made him money. And in a sense, it succeeded as exactly that. But as we've also discussed in our Voxer group and other places, it's almost impossible for Faulkner not to be Faulkner. He has themes, he has ideas, he sets his stories in specific places among specific people for a reason, that he's trying to tell us something about society, and particularly I think he's trying to tell us something about the society of the South. One of the themes in Faulkner's novel is the decaying of the Old South and the transition to a new South, something that he himself was living through. So in this novel we have the old Frenchman's place, an old plantation out in the woods, which is literally falling apart and decaying, where Lee and his dad have a bootlegging business, and where we meet all the characters for the first time. We have that kind of physical decay, but we also have a decay of the old kind of social class structure that's taking place, and this is kind of highlighted more with the Benbows contrasted against the Snopeses and the district attorney, where we have kind of the old gentry of the South, the people who were gentlemen, who were educated, who used to be at the top level. Horace's sister married a Sartoris, some of the most influential, famous Old South families in Yoknapatawpha County, and they used to hold this position of kind of control, where they at the top kind of benignly ran things for everybody else. But we see that has decayed. Narcissa uses the N-word, and Narcissa is worried about her position in society in a way that she never would have been before. And Horace, for all his education, for all his commitment to the ideas of justice and his high ideas, he's really ineffectual. He's not really capable of getting anything done. He doesn't save Temple, even though he intends to. He abandons her essentially back and Miss Reba's. He can't even find her and get her to testify on Lee's behalf. He can't save Lee, and if he can't save Lee, he really isn't saving Ruby or her baby. We see him wanting to save Little Belle from perhaps what has happened to Temple Drake, and in the end we see he really hasn't even done that. Faulkner is showing us the decay of that social class, I think, here. He's also showing us the rise of a social class who essentially comes from nowhere, who comes from, the social class of shopkeepers or small farmers or even tenant farmers, who figure out a way through either, hard work and education like the district attorney, or through, essentially craftiness and sneakiness like Senator Snopes, working their way up in society and eventually taking over. Notice that Snopes is a state senator, and the district attorney has plans to run for the United States Congress, where Benbow, who's from the more upper class of Southern society, is now probably not even going to be able to become a judge. That we see this kind of transitioning. This is one of those things Faulkner talks about a lot. And also Faulkner, in a lot of his novels, spends a lot of time with those people below even that level. People like Lee and his father and Ruby, who are among this social class who really doesn't own land, and who has to approach life in a fairly ruthless way of getting what they want, what they can, when they can, and oftentimes violating the law to achieve that. And we see these kind of social class things taking place. I also think the book has a lot to say about men and women in that Southern society that Faulkner has created. Faulkner creates, I challenge you to find a good man in this book. We might say Benbow, but he in the end he's weak and he's not actually capable of doing the things he sets out to do. You could say Tommy, because Tommy's at least morally right, but Tommy is also mentally handicapped and not capable of actually doing the things necessary to uphold society. So we have, Benbow, who knows he should be doing things to uphold society, but is incapable apparently of doing it. And we have Tommy, who has ideas about moral right and wrong, but because of his mental handicap is incapable of doing anything beyond that. And then in between we have every other kind of man you can imagine, pure evil like Popeye, ruthless and grasping criminal like Lee, grasping and trying to move up like the district attorney, and we could go on. And Gowan Stevens, supposedly Virginia gentleman who's been taught to drink, who's really just an alcoholic and a coward. That men in the book really come off poorly. And, for a book which is reportedly has a lot of misogynist things in it, I'm not saying it doesn't, men come off really badly. And in lots of ways, it's women who appear to be far more capable in these books than men. Now, they may be capable of doing things that we don't approve of, but they are far more capable. And I wanted to read 3 quotes from the book, and these are things I think that I've read before from the book. One of them is, at least this first one is, and it's specifically where Faulkner has characters think about women or talk about men. And so this is the one I read in the video last. He knew that he was just talking. He knew that she knew it too, out of that feminine reserve of unflagging suspicion of all people's actions, which seems at first to be a mere affinity for evil, but which is in reality practical wisdom. So what he's suggesting is that women have a practical wisdom, I think, that allows them or causes them to be suspicious of everybody's actions. And at first this may look like they're just, are attracted to evil, but in reality they are gathering information from which to make decisions. That is a kind of wisdom about, how to survive and how to move forward in the world. If you think about the women in the book, I think Ruby is, despite lots of her actions, Ruby is the most admirable person in the book. She is doing what she has to try to, help the person she loves, even if he's not worthy of it, and to, save her child. Is she willing to do things which are illegal and immoral? Yes, but she has that kind of practical wisdom which lets her view things and decide what to do. She may not always make the right decision, but she's always making a decision to try to survive. And in part, I think what Faulkner is suggesting is that this is what women have to do because men have failed. In chapter 25, when Miss Reba is hosting the other madams at her place after Red's funeral, one of the other madams, women who runs a house of prostitution, says, "It's us girls," Miss Myrtle said. "Men just can't seem to take us and leave us for what we are." In other words, this is not a very feminist idea that men take women and won't leave women alone and try to change us. She goes on to say, "They make us what we are, then they expect us to be different." In other words, she's saying that men make women into, in this case, I guess, prostitutes or women who are sexually interested, and then they don't like that. And in a sense, what she's saying is that men don't treat women like they're human beings. That they treat women differently, and they try to manipulate and control women to get what they want, but they don't really recognize the humanity of women, which I thought was kind of an important statement there. And then I just thought one of my favorite quotes about men comes later. And essentially this is when Horace realizes that Ruby is offering him sex as payment for defending Lee in court. And he just basically, this is what he says. He says, "Good God," he whispered, "what kind of men have you known?" And even though he's talking specifically about the kind of men who would take advantage of Ruby in her efforts to help Lee, I think he's saying things about all the men in the book. And again, if you think about all the men in the book, there aren't very many of them who are particularly admirable. And Benbow is as close as we get. And so I think really, if there is a theme to the book, the theme is that justice is not possible. No character in the book gets justice that I can think of. You know, no character worthy of justice gets justice. Not Ruby, not her child, not Lee, not even Popeye. I mean, Popeye is executed for a crime he didn't commit. Lee is executed in a horrible way for a crime he didn't commit. Were they nice people? No, but you know, that's not justice, killing people for crimes they didn't actually commit. Does, you know, Temple get justice? Well, no. Horrible things happen to Temple, which is completely unjust that all those things happened to her because of the actions of Gowan Stevens. Does Benbow get justice? No, not really. He ends up going back to his wife where he didn't want to be and to a life that he was trying to escape. You know, I think Faulkner's message here is there is no justice. And a lot earlier in the book than the section we're on, chapter 16, Horace is talking to his sister and Miss Jenny at Narcissa's house. And Horace says, "I cannot stand idly by and see injustice." And he's interrupted by Miss Jenny, who says, "You won't ever catch up with injustice, Horace," Miss Jenny says. And I think that's really the theme of the book, that you'll never catch up with injustice, that the world, perhaps the South from Faulkner's point of view, is an unjust place. And it seems to be becoming increasingly that way. You know, Carrie, from Very Literary Carrie, brought up in our discussion on Voxer that Lee's dad is blind and deaf, you know, and maybe that this was a symbol of, you know, justice being blind. Well, justice being blind means that justice is supposed to be impartial. But if justice, if we take the idea that Lee's dad is, you know, a figurative representative of justice, then he's not only blind, but he's deaf, which means he's not really justice, because he's not just being, you know, unbiased. He also can't actually hear the truth. Carrie suggested, and one of the things that I thought I would end up suggesting here is that Faulkner is making an allegory between the injustice we see done in the book and the injustice of slavery and discrimination in the South. That was my theory. And I thought that would be proved out as I went through the book, and I really don't think it is. You know, interestingly, this is a Faulkner novel without a lot of African American characters, and it made me think about the fact that even though a lot of African American characters appear in Faulkner's novel, they rarely appear as anything other than stuck in the social class that they're in, which is the case, you know, in segregation. But we don't see Faulkner kind of going outside the traditional roles of African American characters. But what I thought would be the key to kind of making that connection between, you know, the changing South and the blurring of social class lines would also be a blurring of racial lines. And I thought the theme would be the injustice that had been visited on African Americans in the past is now being visited on white people in the South because of those past injustices. I don't know that that's really true. I don't know that I believe that anymore, even though I will say that Lee's death by burning to death through a lynching for rape. Notice they are killing him for raping Temple. This is something that was done, even just the suspicion of an African American man raping a white woman resulted oftentimes in these lynchings. And Lee is treated more or less as an African American man would be treated, accused of the same thing, even without direct testimony, that he is the potential victim of a lynching, and in the end he is lynched in a sense, as many African American men were. So I'm not 100% sure that that's not a part of what Faulkner was trying to do, but if he is, I'm not sure how effectively he did it. So is this a good book? Is this a good Faulkner novel? No, it's not a good book. There are real problems with it. Part of the problem has to do with the fact that the book was rewritten and a lot of stuff was taken out. In the beginning, Sanctuary was supposed to be about Benbow, about Horace Benbow, and we learned a lot more about him as a character in the chapters that preceded the chapters where this book actually starts. And a lot of what we'd learned about Benbow there would be unsettling and unpleasant. That was kind of cut out. But when it was cut out, I don't think Faulkner very carefully went back and reshaped the Benbow character to eliminate all the things we didn't know, which means that Benbow is confusing. that, we don't know why Benbow does the thing he does or why he believes what he believes. That's not fully explained, and that's a big problem because Horace Benbow is a big part of the novel. And then my other real complaint about the novel is that the characters are fairly, flat. They're almost cartoonish. Popeye is cartoonishly evil. Temple is cartoonishly naive and innocent and incapable of helping herself. All the characters who matter don't have a lot of subtlety to them, and the most fully developed character, I think, again, is Ruby, and that's not a problem. But having all these other kind of cardboard cutout characters does mean the novel to me kind of lacks some depth. And then I think the novel's just not a very good novel because Faulkner isn't doing what Faulkner's best at. Anyway, there you go. There's my assessment. There's my wrap-up of our Faulkner 2021 title, Sanctuary. I look forward to your comments in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching.